On our protagonist's birthday, his parents arrived in a Rolls-Royce to pick him up, dressed in expensive formal where he'd only ever seen in magazines. With wide smiles, they congratulated him on passing a 20-year test while he stood there clutching a cold, rock-hard bun in his hand. That was his birthday dinner. He looked at them, then at the car gleaming in the dilapidated alleyway, wondering what kind of test they meant. A test that required 20 years of hunger and cold to complete. His mother tried to take his hand, but he instinctively pulled away. The massive diamond ring on her finger stung his eyes. She urged him, Chinemo, to come home for the birthday feast they'd prepared. They told him the family's multi-billion-dollar fortune would all be his. His name was Chinemo, a name that felt quite fitting, actually. For 25 years, he had spent most of his time in silence, enduring hunger, the biting cold, and the constant mockery of his classmates. He had endured the landlord's insults, believing his parents were somewhere out of sight, suffering in silence, just like him. He thought they were a family struggling together against poverty, until today, his 25th birthday, when they appeared in a phantom wearing haute couture. They descended like gods to tell him that the last 20 years of his life were merely a carefully designed ordeal. He looked at his father, Chen Jianghe, a man whose very name commanded power. He patted Mo's shoulder with the scrutinizing gaze of a superior and said, "Not bad." He remarked that Mo's constitution was sturdy enough and he hadn't been spoiled. Those words hit Mo's heart like a heavy sledgehammer. At age 5, he had been sent to the city's most dilapidated slum to be raised by a distant relative. They sent exactly 500 yuan monthly. It was just enough to keep him from starving. He grew up in patched clothes, eating the cheapest food imaginable. Then, at age 10, the relative kicked him out for not being profitable enough. He moved into a windowless partitioned room that cost 100 yuan a month. Once, with a fever of 40 degrees, he lay there burning up and drifting in and out of consciousness. With no money for a hospital, he just curled up. He pressed against the cold wall for a hint of relief, crying out for his parents, but only the howling north wind answered him. He had assumed they were working grueling jobs far away, unable to visit just to save on travel costs. He even dreamed of supporting them one day. It's almost laughable now. While he was rolling on the floor in pain from a starving stomach at midnight, they were likely at a gala. While they were clinking glasses in a luxury ballroom, he was running kilometers through a rainstorm just to save a few cents on bus fare. While he was struggling, they were likely sitting in their warm, comfortable luxury car, casually remarking on how dreadful the weather had become. His mother, Ling Wan, was so well-preserved she looked barely 30. She reached out to touch his face, her eyes brimming with tears. She whispered that everything they had done, every hardship he had endured, was all for his own sake. It was for his own good, she claimed. A truly convenient justification, wasn't it? He looked at her and asked, one word at a time, what would have happened if he hadn't passed their little test. He asked if they would care if he had died of illness or been beaten to death in some dark, forgotten alleyway. Ling Wan's face turned pale for a moment, but Chen Jianghe immediately cut in with the unquestionable authority of a patriarch, saying there were no ifs. He declared that a son of Chen Jianghe wasn't that fragile, claiming they had been watching him from the shadows and that he was always safe. We see now what they called observation, watching him get cornered by school bullies who shoved his head into a water bucket. It meant watching him fight stray dogs for a single bun, or nearly being crushed by falling rebar while working at a dangerous construction site. That was their version of safety. In that moment, Mo's heart turned cold as he realized his entire life had been a performance for an audience. And his own parents were the two spectators who had enjoyed the show the most. "So, the test is over?" he asked, his voice sounding like a stranger's. Chen Jianghe laughed loudly and confirmed it was over. From this day forward, Mo was the sole heir to the massive Chen Group fortune. He told Mo it was time to go home, mentioning that his brother and his girlfriend were both waiting for him there. Mo's mind went blank. He had a brother? And why was his girlfriend, Lin Shui, already at their house? Lin Shui was his college sweetheart. They had been together for 3 years, and she always insisted she loved him for who he was, not his money. He had believed they were a case of true love, but now he realized she might have just been another part of this elaborate trial. He was ushered into the Rolls-Royce, where the air was thick with an expensive fragrance he couldn't even name. To be honest, it was overwhelming. The soft leather seats and his old, rock-hard wooden bed belonged to two different universes. The car began to glide out of the muddy alleyway. He glanced back one last time to see the old man who sold buns watching the car with curiosity, the man he had visited every day for 20 years. He used to buy the 2 cheapest, hardest buns every single day. The poor boy had finally climbed into such a luxury car. He looked away, watching the familiar, dilapidated buildings retreat rapidly through the window. Those old ruins were gradually replaced by brand new skyscrapers. We see them enter a wealthy district he had only ever seen on television. Every villa looked like a heavily guarded fortress. Finally, the car stopped before the most magnificent mansion of all, its massive iron gates opening slowly. 2 uniformed security guards bowed respectfully, welcoming the master, the madam, and the eldest young master back home. That title, Eldest Young Master, made Mo feel a wave of nausea. He followed Chun Jianghe and Ling Wan inside, greeted by indescribable luxury. There were massive crystal chandeliers and marble floors polished to a mirror shine. On the walls hung famous paintings that looked expensive, even if he didn't understand them. On the living room sofa sat a young man around Mo's age. He wore a perfectly tailored suit and carried an air of refined nobility. His features bore a slight resemblance to Mo's, but his face held an innate sense of superiority. Beside him sat a girl Mo knew all too well. It was Lin Shui. She wore a white dress he had never seen before and exquisite makeup. Seeing him, she stood up immediately, looking quite uneasy. She called out his name, but the other young man also stood up, stretching lazily as he looked Mo up and down. He remarked mockingly that this must be the brother who had been eating dirt for 20 years. Their parents' test had been quite brutal, hadn't it? He noted that Mo looked just like a beggar. His words were like poisoned needles, stabbing directly into Mo's heart. Chun Jianghe frowned and scolded the boy, calling him Chen Hui, asking how he could speak to his brother that way. But the scolding lacked any real weight. In fact, Mo saw a flicker of pride and indulgence in his father's eyes for this son, Chen Hui. So, that was his name. One was named Mo for silence, and the other Hui for brilliance. One was destined for the shadows, the other for the dazzling sunlight. How ironic. Ling Wan walked over and took Lin Shui's hand, patting it affectionately. She apologized for the wait and noted that Mo was finally back. She told Lin Shui that their good life was just beginning. Lin Shui gave Mo a forced smile, though her eyes were darting away nervously. Mo stared at her, his heart feeling as though an invisible hand were squeezing it. He asked her, his voice trembling, if she had known all along. He repeated the question, asking if she had always known the truth. Lin Shui's face turned pale, and she bit her lip, unable to meet his gaze. Beside him, Chun Hui let out a mocking laugh and answered for her. He asked if Mo truly believed a beauty like Lin Shui would ever fall for a penniless loser. To be honest, Lin Shui was the fiancé their parents had pre-selected for him long ago. The plan was for her to stay close and act out a drama of eternal love, all part of the test to see if he could find hope, even in the most desperate situations. He asked if Mo was moved, but in that moment, Mo's entire world completely collapsed. He felt nothing but a bone-chilling cold and a wave of nausea. The only light in his life had been a fake lamp arranged by them. All his perseverance, his hopes, and his love had been nothing more than a cruel joke. He looked at Lin Shui, the girl who once cooked porridge for him when he was sick and held him when he was down, promising to stay forever. Now, her face was a mask of panic and guilt. She begged him to let her explain, but Mo interrupted her, his voice sounding terrifyingly calm. He asked what there was to explain, how she told him she loved him while spending his parents' money on a life of luxury, or how she watched him eat dry buns while secretly laughing at what a fool he was. Lin Shui's tears began to fall. But enough was enough. Chun Hui impatiently cut her off, pulling her behind him in a protective stance as he faced Mo. He told her to stop crying, noting that Mo was now the eldest young master and she would soon be the wife of a wealthy heir. He asked what more she could want before turning back to Mo, his face full of disdain despite their resemblance. He warned Mo not to be ungrateful, saying it was a blessing that Lin Shui had bothered to act for him for so many years. He claimed he couldn't have stood Mo's stench of poverty for a single day, splitting one bun into 2 meals and wearing the same clothes for 5 years. Every word felt like a knife, but Mo didn't even look at him. His gaze remained locked on Lin Shui, searching for one truth. He asked her if she had ever loved him. He repeated the question, using every ounce of strength he had left to speak. He asked if she had loved him for even a day or a single second. Lin Shui trembled and opened her mouth to speak. But under Chun Hui's warning gaze, not a single word came out. Her silence was the most brutal answer of all. Mo began to laugh, but as he did, the tears finally fell. He felt like a massive fool. Finally, Chun Jianghe's face darkened at the chaos. Her majestic voice caused the living room to fall instantly silent. She walked over to Mo, looking down at him with a cold, heavy silence. She told him she knew this was difficult to accept, but insisted that facts were facts. They had done all of this for his own good. It was for the sake of the entire Qin family, she claimed. His brother, Chen Hui, had been spoiled since childhood and was far too impulsive. He wasn't fit for great responsibility. But Mo, having endured 20 years of hardship, possessed a resilient character and a ruthless edge. To her, this made him the perfect heir for the Qin family. She spoke as if she were granting him a magnificent favor. Ruthless, she called him. And it was true. To steal a discarded chicken leg from other beggars, he had once broken a girl's leg. To protect his hard-earned tuition money, he had used a brick to crack the heads of 3 thugs. What they saw as ruthlessness was simply his survival instinct, forged in blood and tears. Now, ironically, it had become the quality they praised most. He asked if that gave them the right to comfortably strip away 20 years of his life. He looked her straight in the eye, but she didn't flinch. She told him it wasn't a deprivation. It was a trial, a way to temper his spirit. Chun Jianghe added with a heavy tone that those who achieve greatness must not sweat the small details. He claimed Mo had only lost a few insignificant years. In exchange, he would gain an entire business empire. Insignificant years, Mo repeated, his fists clenching so hard his knuckles turned white. His nails dug deep into his palms. He remembered the nights spent crying alone in the cold, and the days when hunger felt like a knife in his stomach. He remembered being called a bastard and a pauper to his face. To these people, all of that was just an insignificant detail in their grand plan. He looked at the woman before him, and then at Lin Shui. Then, he asked what would happen if he simply said no. What if he didn't want their filthy money or their title of heir? The air in the room seemed to freeze, and Chun Jianghe's face turned a sickly ashen color. Lin Shui rushed forward, grabbing his arm and pleading with him not to say such foolish things. She asked how he could possibly reject what was his. Mo pulled his arm away and stepped back as if her touch were a contagious virus. He told her that nothing in this room belonged to him. His things were the cold buns, the drafty shacks, and the old clothes covered in patches. Those were the only things he truly owned. He pointed at the golden splendor surrounding them and nearly roared that everything they stood for made him feel utterly sick to his stomach. Chun Jianghe flew into a rage, shouting for him to watch his tongue before delivering a sharp, stinging slap across Mo's face. The sting of the blow lingered. This was the first time in 25 years he had ever been struck by his father. He didn't dodge or fight back. He simply watched her in silence. His calmness, it seemed, was far more infuriating to her than any physical resistance could have been. She demanded to know who he thought he was and what right he had to refuse. She pointed a finger at his face, her body trembling with rage. She told Chun Mo that he belonged to the Chun family in life and would remain theirs in death. His entire existence, she claimed, had been decided the moment he was born. Whether he chose to accept it or not, he had no choice but to comply. She roared for someone to come, and 2 bodyguards immediately entered. She ordered them to take the young master upstairs to his room. Without her explicit permission, he was not to take a single step outside. He didn't resist, or perhaps, he simply lacked the strength to try. His inner world had become a landscape of ruins. Like a puppet, he allowed the 2 guards to haul him toward the stairs. As they passed Chen Hui, his brother leaned in, whispering in a voice meant only for the 2 of them to hear. He told Mo to stop struggling, calling him nothing more than a dog raised by their parents. Now that the masters wanted him home, he should obey. He warned him not to dream of escaping or coveting his position. That seat belonged to Hui, and Mo was just there to follow orders. And so, we see Mo locked away in a room. It was massive, larger, in fact, than the entire home he had lived in before. It featured a private bathroom, a soft bed, and floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside lay a perfectly manicured garden and a shimmering blue pool. Yet, to him, this place felt more suffocating and oppressive than his old windowless partition room ever had. To be honest, it wasn't even close. This was a magnificent prison built of gold and silver, and he was the inmate who had just been handed a life sentence. He remained trapped in this gilded cage for 3 days. During that time, he saw no one except a servant who brought him regular meals. The food was exquisite, delicacies from the mountains and the sea, but he couldn't swallow a single bite. His appetite had vanished. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw Lin Shui's foolish face, Chun Hui's contemptuous smirk, and heard Chun Jianghe's entitled tone. They had told him he only lost an insignificant childhood. Insignificant. At that thought, his stomach began to cramp with a sharp, sudden pain. The pain wasn't from hunger, but from 20 years of suppressed agony finally clawing its way to the surface. And who could blame him, really? The pain erupted all at once. He collapsed onto the floor, cold sweat soaking through his clothes. When a servant arrived with his meal, she found him in this state. Terrified and panicked, she quickly summoned a family doctor in a white coat. He arrived shortly after and performed a series of examinations on Mo. The final diagnosis was chronic gastritis caused by long-term malnutrition, now aggravated by intense emotional turmoil. It was a heavy toll for a young man to bear. The doctor administered an injection and prescribed some medication. Before leaving, he looked at Mo with a sympathetic gaze and let out a heavy sigh. He told the young master to try and stay positive, noting that ruining his own health simply wasn't worth it. And he was right, it wasn't worth it at all. To destroy his body for people who didn't care for him was a waste. Once the pain subsided, he crawled up from the floor and truly looked at the room. For the first time, he examined his surroundings before walking to the massive floor-to-ceiling window. He realized he was only on the 2nd floor. Below him lay a soft, manicured lawn. He calculated that a jump from this height likely wouldn't be fatal, provided he was careful enough. He knew he had to escape this place. He didn't want to be an heir, nor did he want to see those hypocritical faces for another second. He only wanted to return to his world, shabby as it was. At least it was real. And so, he began to formulate a plan to leave the villa. The security was tight, with cameras and bodyguards everywhere. Leaving through the front door was an absolute impossibility, so he watched and waited. After observing for several days, he learned the guards' rotation patterns. Between 3 and 4 in the morning, their vigilance was at its lowest. He would only have one chance. On the 4th night, he pretended to sleep until the wall clock finally struck 3, then he quietly slipped out of bed. He stripped off the expensive silk pajamas and changed back into the faded, old clothes he had arrived in. These clothes made him feel like himself again. He felt like the real Chun Mo once more. He twisted his bedsheets into a makeshift rope, tying one end to the bedpost and tossing the other out the window. Taking a deep breath, he climbed out and began to slide down the sheets inch by inch. It was a daring move, but he was desperate. The second floor wasn't exactly high, but it wasn't low either. As he neared the ground, he realized the sheets weren't quite long enough to reach. Stealing his nerves, he let go and dropped. A sharp, searing pain shot through his ankle upon impact, but he didn't have time to check for injuries. Limping heavily, he hurried toward the perimeter wall. It was high and topped with an electric fence, but he had already scouted a potential weakness. There was a corner near a large tree where the cameras had a blind spot and the electric wire seemed loose. He pushed through the pain. Ignoring the searing pain in his ankle, he used both hands and feet to scramble up the large tree, clinging to the trunk like a gecko. Inch by inch, he edged toward the perimeter wall. He carefully avoided the electric fence, took a deep breath, and leaped down from the top. The grass outside cushioned most of the impact. He had done it. He had escaped. To him, the air of freedom had never tasted so sweet. He didn't dare linger for even a second. Dragging his injured leg, he ran desperately into the darkness, though he had no idea where to go. His only thought was to get as far away from that golden cage as possible. He wandered the streets aimlessly as the night began to fade. The pain in his ankle grew more intense with every step. As dawn approached, he found himself standing at a very familiar street corner. This was where Ling Xue's rented apartment was located. Even though he knew she had deceived him, he felt drawn to this place by some inexplicable force. He looked up at the familiar third-floor window, but the lights were dark. He told himself she had probably moved out already. Perhaps she had moved into that magnificent prison that was supposed to be his. He gave a self-mocking laugh and turned to leave, but then something happened. A taxi pulled up in front of the building. The door opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. It was Ling Xue, looking quite exhausted. She looked haggard, yet she was still dressed in expensive designer clothes. She paid the driver and turned toward the entrance of the building. Chen Mo instinctively ducked into the nearby shadows. She didn't notice him and walked straight inside. A few minutes later, the lights on the third floor flickered on. He stood there like a fool, unsure of what he was even trying to achieve. Perhaps, deep down, he was still clinging to a shred of unrealistic hope. He told himself it was a fantasy, yet he couldn't look away, just as he felt utterly disheartened and ready to leave for good. A flashy red Ferrari roared to a halt right in front of the building. The door swung open, and Chun Hui stepped out of the car. Chun Hui glanced up at the third-floor window with a smug, triumphant grin before casually strolling into the building. It was a sight that changed everything. Chun Mo's mind went blank as a buzzing sound filled his ears. In that instant, it felt as though all the blood in his body rushed to his head. He charged forward and kicked open the old building door. He ran toward the third floor like a madman, the agony in his ankle completely forgotten. Inside the living room, Chun Hui was pinning Ling Xue against the wall, kissing her passionately. Her clothes had already been partially torn open. The sound of the door being kicked and startled them, and they both turned around. Seeing Chun Mo there, Chun Hui didn't even look surprised. Instead of letting go, Chun Hui pulled Ling Xue closer and kissed her even more forcefully right in front of Chen Mo. She made a half-hearted attempt to struggle at first, but eventually, she simply went limp in his arms. It was a devastating sight, and in that moment, Chen Mo could practically hear the sound of his own heart shattering. It was a loud, cold realization. Chun Hui finally released her, and, wiping his mouth with his hand, he looked at Chun Mo as if he were watching an entertaining play. Ling Xue adjusted her messy clothes, keeping her head down, unable to meet his eyes. Her face still carried a lingering, suggestive flush. Chun Mo didn't say a word. He just stared at them, his body trembling, not from fear, but from a pure, all-consuming rage that wanted to destroy everything in its path. Chun Hui walked up to him and mockingly patted his cheek, a gesture dripping with contempt. He told Chen Mo that Ling Xue was just someone his parents found for him, but that he was the one she had always truly loved. To be honest, Chen Hui was enjoying this far too much. He asked if Chun Mo really thought a poor wretch like him could keep her devoted. Then came the crushing truth. They had been together for an entire year. While Chun Mo had been sweating away at construction sites for their future, and while he was saving every penny just to buy her a birthday gift, they were behind his back, indulging in their secret passion. It is a bitter irony, isn't it? While he sacrificed everything for a dream, they were busy making a mockery of his efforts. At that moment, Chen Mo felt like the biggest fool in the world. "Get out," he hissed through gritted teeth. Chen Hui just laughed, asking who Chen Mo thought he was. He claimed the rent and all of Chun Mo's living expenses were essentially his charity. He even claimed Ling Xue was just a gift he was passing on now that he was bored. That statement finally ignited the fuse. With a roar, Chun Mo swung a fist into his face. The blow sent Chun Hui flying into the coffee table, the sound of shattering glass piercing the air. He scrambled up and lunged back, and the two began to brawl. Chun Mo's strikes were precise, and though Chun Hui had some training, he was quickly losing ground. Suddenly, Chun Jianghe burst in with his bodyguards and shouted for them to stop. Seeing Chun Hui covered in blood, the father delivered a brutal kick to Chun Mo's back. He slammed into the wall, coughing up blood, as Lin Wanjin rushed in crying for an ambulance. Chun Jianghe slapped Chun Mo across the face and ordered the guards to drag him back to the villa's basement. No food or water was to be given without his express command. The guards dragged him away like a stray dog. As he passed Ling Shui, he saw a flicker of guilt in her eyes, but it was far outweighed by her fear and desire to stay away. In that instant, whatever was left of Chun Mo's heart finally died. He saw the distance in her gaze, and he knew there was nothing left to save. Chun Hui mockingly added that their wedding was set for next month and invited him to the celebration. He kicked Chun Mo, demanding he kneel and beg for mercy. He told her to get out, his eyes devoid of any life as he stared at her, unsettled by his gaze. She left after snapping that she would make his life a living hell. As his consciousness blurred, he heard Lin Wanjin arguing with someone. Shortly after, he was carried away, drifting between shadows and light before finally waking up again. We find him lying in a magnificent room, with Lin Wanjin sitting by the bed. With red-rimmed eyes, she explained they only did it for his own good. She claimed the Qin family needed a strong heir, and they had to place their hopes in him. He interrupted her apology about Ling Shui, demanding a phone and an independent account. He agreed to learn how to be the heir, but he had his own rules. First, he told her never to call him Momo again. To be honest, that name belonged to a different life. He warned them to stay out of his business and insisted that Chun Hui must pay the price. Lin Wanjin pleaded for mercy, but his cold rebuttal left her utterly speechless. She eventually left, looking completely soul-crushed. That afternoon, a weary Qin Jianghe arrived and told him that his conditions had been accepted. He pointed to a black card on the nightstand, mentioning that Assistant Zhang would introduce him to the company tomorrow. He asked for leniency for Chun Hui, but received no response. The next day, he put on a suit. Zhang Heng was already waiting downstairs, respectfully addressing him as Mr. Chun before escorting him to the Chun Group headquarters. When Zhang Heng brought over the group's industrial data, he simply closed it. He didn't need to learn the basics. He only wanted two specific things. He demanded a list of all the Chun Group's enemies and detailed information on all of Chun Hui's properties. Though Zhang Heng hesitated, the documents arrived within the hour. He picked up the file on Chun Hui, his pupils narrowing as he read. It turned out Chun Hui owned 3 companies, including a predatory lending firm. He immediately opened the detailed records for that business. One particular case involved a female college student named Lina. Yes, a very typical victim, it seems. The records showed that Lina was a student who desperately needed money for her father's serious illness. She had borrowed 50,000 yuan from Chun Hui's company. In less than 6 months, the debt had ballooned to 500,000. Unable to pay, the debt collectors threatened her with private photos and harassed her father. They even caused a scene in her father's hospital ward. Unable to bear the humiliation, the girl eventually jumped from the roof of her dormitory. A tragic end, truly. Her father, devastated by the shock, passed away that same night. Chun Hui, you really do deserve to die, he muttered, picking up the phone to call Zhang Heng. He told the assistant to arrange a meeting with the head of Serious Capital. He wanted them to know that Chun Mo of the Chun Group wished to discuss business. Zhang Heng moved quickly, or perhaps Serious Capital was simply eager to respond. Within half an hour of the call, the other party had already sent a reply. The meeting was set for 8 o'clock tonight at the city's most exclusive private club, the Zenith Palace. And this is where the matter becomes far more complicated. As it turns out, the Zenith Palace is actually one of Chun Hui's properties. Whether this is a mere coincidence or a deliberate setup remains to be seen. A cold smile played across his lips as he set the phone down. He couldn't help but wonder if the universe was being ironic or if someone was pulling the strings. Regardless of the reason, tonight's performance promised to be quite spectacular. As evening fell, he asked Zhang Heng to drive him home, but not to that gilded villa. Instead, we returned to his dilapidated rental house, as he needed to retrieve something. When the car stopped at the familiar alley entrance, Zhang Heng looked on in silence. The assistant stared at the urban slum, a place so completely at odds with his usual world, and his face was etched with pure shock. He likely couldn't fathom that the eldest young master of the Chun Group had grown up in such a place. Chun Mo ignored his surprise and walked straight ahead. He entered the crumbling tenement building. His room remained exactly as he had left it, everything now covered in a thin, silent layer of dust. He walked to the bed and lifted the worn-out mattress. Hidden beneath was an object wrapped carefully in a piece of cloth. Unwrapping it, he revealed a rusted fruit knife. He had scavenged it from a trash heap for self-defense when he was only 10 years old. It had been his only companion through countless nights of fear. He wrapped it back up and tucked it firmly into his coat, feeling its familiar weight. Then, he walked over to the windowless wall. A single photograph was pinned there, yellowed with age, showing a girl with a sweet, radiant smile. It was Ling Shui. She had given it to him when they first started dating, promising that her smile would be the sunlight this dark room lacked. He stared at the photo for a long, long time. Then, reaching out, he slowly tore it from the wall, his expression unreadable. He shredded it into pieces, along with the very last trace of his ridiculous lingering affection. At 8 o'clock sharp, he arrived at the Zenith Palace. The club certainly lived up to its name, boasting an interior so lavish and golden that it truly resembled a palace in the clouds. The guests moving through the halls were the epitome of wealth and status. A manager in a graceful cheongsam respectfully led him toward the top floor. She informed him that Brother Wolf was already waiting inside the private suite. He pushed the door open and found only one man sitting there. The man wore a black traditional suit and sat with his back to the door, focused entirely on the slow, methodical art of brewing tea. Without turning around, the man simply told him to sit. Chun Imo walked over and took the seat opposite him, watching the steam rise. The man poured a cup and pushed it toward him, the aroma of premium Longjing tea filling the air. Chun Imo picked it up, but he did not drink. He simply held the cup to his nose to catch the scent, admitting he knew nothing of tea. The man finally turned his head, looking to be about 40. A jagged scar ran from the corner of his eye to his mouth, giving him an undeniably fierce aura. He remarked that if one drinks enough, they eventually understand. Just like people, he suggested, the more you see, the more you know. His gaze was as sharp as a hawk's, as if he could peer into one's very soul. Chun Imo asked if he was the head of Sirius Capital, the man known as Brother Wolf. The man smiled, revealing a row of white teeth, noting that everyone called him that. When asked what he wanted, Chun Imo got straight to the point, stating he wanted to do business. Brother Wolf raised an eyebrow, appearing genuinely interested. He invited Chun Imo to speak his mind. Chun Imo told him he wanted help to ruin someone. When asked who, he gave the name, Chun Hui. Upon hearing that name, Brother Wolf's expression didn't change in the slightest. He simply picked up his teacup, blew on it gently, and took a slow sip. He noted that Chun Hui was Chun Jianghe's son and asked for a reason. Chun Mo's answer was simple, because he deserves to die. Brother Wolf just laughed. He found it interesting, asking if Chun Imo knew this club belonged to the man he wanted to ruin. Chun Imo knew. He then asked if he knew the Chun Group was Sirius Capital's next target. Chun Imo knew that too. Brother Wolf's eyes turned playful as he wondered why he'd still come, asking if Chun Imo feared being ruined along with them. Chun Imo was certain he wouldn't. When asked why he was so sure, Chun Imo looked him in the eye. He believed they were the same kind of people, those who enjoy watching the powerful fall from grace. Besides, he added, the enemy of an enemy is a friend. This statement actually caused the formidable Brother Wolf to pause in surprise. He repeated the phrase, musing that the legendary Chun Jianghe had somehow raised such an interesting son. He decided then and there to take the deal. He asked how Chun Imo wanted to proceed. It was quite simple, really. Chun Imo reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive, sliding it across the table. Inside was all the dirt on Chun Hui's lending company. It contained everything from falsified accounts to the brutal collection tactics that had cost people their lives. Chun Imo wanted it all exposed. He wanted Chun Hui's reputation destroyed and for the man to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Brother Wolf tossed the drive in his hand, a cruel smile spreading across his face. He asked if it was truly that simple. Chun Imo confirmed it was. Brother Wolf promised that within 3 days, Chun Hui's name would be all over the headlines. He wished Chun Imo a pleasant collaboration. As Chun Imo stood to leave, Brother Wolf called out to him. He asked if Chun Imo didn't want to know why he was targeting the Chun family in the first place. Chun Imo stopped and turned back to listen. Brother Wolf's gaze suddenly became incredibly venomous as he revealed it was because of what Chun Mo's father had done 20 years ago. He explained that Jianghe used the exact same methods to destroy his family, leading his father to jump from the roof of this very building. Chun Imo felt a sudden shiver, realizing that beneath the surface of a simple business rivalry lay such a deep, bloody grudge. It was a debt of blood, which explained why he was so relentless in his pursuit of the Chin family. Do you still think we are friends? Brother Wolf asked coldly. Chun Imo didn't hesitate for a second, answering that they were, at least when it came to bringing down the Chins. After saying his piece, he turned and left the private room. As he stepped out, he heard Brother Wolf murmuring to himself behind him. He whispered that Jianghe likely never imagined his own son would be the one to hand-deliver such a devastating gift. Chun Imo didn't look back. He walked out of the club and got into Zhang Heng's car. When asked where to go next, he suggested a good place to watch the show. Half an hour later, they pulled up at a hotel directly across from where Chun Hui and Lin Shui were holding their engagement party. He booked a suite with the best possible view. Standing before the massive floor-to-ceiling window, he watched the brightly lit hotel opposite, knowing the show was about to begin. 3 days later, at the engagement banquet, nearly every person of importance in Yun City had received an invitation to the event. It seemed everyone who was anyone was there. The Chin family had booked the most luxurious 6-star hotel in the city center for the occasion. The scene was incredibly grand. Chun Jianghe wanted to use this union to announce to the world that the next generation of Chins was ready to lead. Unfortunately, he had miscalculated quite badly. Chun Imo didn't attend the banquet in person, choosing instead to stay in his suite. He stood by his window with a high-powered telescope, quietly watching everything unfold. By 6 in the evening, the guests began to arrive in waves. Luxury cars lined up at the entrance as elegantly dressed men and women walked the red carpet with practiced smiles. Chun Jianghe and Lin Wan stood at the door as hosts, greeting guests with radiant faces. Chun Hui and Lin Shui stood beside them like a perfect couple. Chun Hui wore a white custom suit, his hair perfectly styled, his face glowing with the smile of a man at the top of his game. Lin Shui was dressed in an expensive gown, looking every bit like a princess. She held Chun Hui's arm, wearing a look of supposed happiness. To be honest, that smile looked a bit stiff to Chin Mo's eyes. On the giant screens, a video of their romance began to play. It showed their journey from meeting to falling in love, all edited to look incredibly romantic and deeply moving. Or so it seemed. Below the stage, the guests erupted in waves of admiration and blessings as Chun Hui took Lin Shue's hand and walked onto the platform with total confidence. The host spoke words of celebration with an impassioned voice before handing the microphone over to Chun Hui. Now, let us welcome our handsome groom with a warm round of applause. He invited Mr. Chun Hui to share his feelings at this momentous occasion. Chun Hui took the microphone and cleared his throat, looking every bit the successful heir. He gazed affectionately at Lin Shui and began to speak, telling her that meeting her was the luckiest thing that had ever happened in his life. But before he could finish his sentence, the massive screen in the banquet hall suddenly flickered. The sweet romance video that had been playing just moments ago vanished. In an instant, the screen turned to static, and then things took a very dark turn indeed. The romantic atmosphere evaporated immediately. A series of unsightly photos and shocking videos appeared on the screen without any warning. They were the cold, hard evidence of Chun Hui's lending company's brutal collection methods. We see photos of debtors beaten until they were covered in blood, their faces unrecognizable. It was a side of the Chun family business no one was supposed to see. The desperate cries of a girl, begging to repay them in her next life, echoed through the speakers and filled the entire banquet hall. Everyone was utterly paralyzed by what they heard. The scene fell into a deathly silence for a heartbeat, followed by an absolute explosion of uproar. People began to whisper in shock, wondering what on earth was happening. Guests muttered that Chun Hui was actually involved in such wicked business. It was sickening to think he had driven people to their deaths. They wondered how the Chins could raise such a son. Up on the stage, Chun Hui's face turned as pale as paper in an instant. He held the microphone, his entire body trembling so violently he couldn't utter a single word. He stood there shaking, completely speechless, while Lin Shui was so terrified she lost all her composure, let out a piercing scream, and collapsed to the floor. Chun Jianghe was the first to snap out of the shock, roaring at the backstage crew to shut it off immediately. But his orders were useless. The screen simply wouldn't turn off. Those evidences of his crimes played over and over again before everyone's eyes, like a very public, very brutal execution. To make matters even worse, it seemed someone had already called the police. The doors of the banquet hall were suddenly burst open from the outside by a group of uniformed officers. The police rushed in, and their leader stepped onto the stage holding an arrest warrant. He looked directly at the groom, who was now looking anything but celebratory. He informed Chun Hui that he was under suspicion for illegal business operations, violent debt collection, and intentional assault. The cold handcuffs were snapped onto Chun Hui's wrists. Chun Hui finally reacted to the horror, struggling frantically and screaming that it wasn't him, that he was being framed. It was a desperate, if somewhat pathetic, display. He howled for his father to save him. Chun Jianghe tried to step forward to help his favorite son, but he was immediately blocked by the officers. Dragged away like a common criminal, Chun Hui's departure was anything but dignified. His father, Chun Jianghe, was so consumed by rage that his entire body began to shake. Gasping for air, the elder Chen suddenly collapsed straight to the floor. Ling Wan rushed toward him with a piercing scream as the engagement banquet, once so grand, fell into total chaos. In an instant, the celebration turned into a complete farce. Guests scattered like frightened birds, terrified of being associated with the Chen family, while the reporters remained behind. Like sharks sensing blood in the water, the photographers began snapping pictures frantically. Nearby, our protagonist lowered his binoculars and finished a glass of red wine in a single gulp. It truly was a magnificent performance. He wondered if Chun Hui enjoyed this particular engagement gift, as he watched the chaotic scene from a distance with a gaze that remained utterly detached. There was no joy in his heart, only a hollow, biting cold. He knew this wasn't the end, it was merely the beginning. Just then, his phone rang. It was Brother Lang calling. Brother Lang's voice carried a hint of a smile as he asked if the gift had been received. He confirmed it had been spectacular, but Lang told him not to celebrate just yet, as more was coming. Brother Lang explained that he had already sent anonymous reports regarding the Chun Group's tax evasion and bribery to the authorities. By tomorrow morning, the situation would escalate further. Investigators and disciplinary officials would be visiting the Chun Group for a very unpleasant chat. Even if Chun Jianghe survived his collapse, the family legacy was effectively finished. He remained silent, surprised to find that Brother Lang's methods were even more ruthless and final than his own. It was clear that Lang intended to pull the Chun family up by their very roots. Sensing the silence, Brother Lang asked if he was getting soft-hearted. He simply replied that he wasn't, which seemed to satisfy the man on the other end of the line. Brother Lang reassured him that he would keep his word and leave him his rightful share once the Chins fell. However, he coldly replied that he didn't need any handouts. He told Lang that whatever he wanted, he would take for himself, before abruptly hanging up. He turned to the window, watching the city's neon lights flicker in the darkness. The lights blurred into a hazy glow before his eyes. He had assumed that revenge would bring him happiness, yet he couldn't understand why his heart felt so incredibly empty. At that moment, a sudden knock at the door broke his train of thought. He walked over and opened it, only to find a very unexpected visitor standing there. He looked at the person before him, whose eyes were filled with a mixture of terror and desperation. Before a word could be said, she dropped to her knees and begged him to let Chun Hui go. She sobbed that she knew she was wrong and realized that he was the one behind everything. She pleaded with him to show some mercy and spare Chun Hui just this once. She clung to his legs, weeping as if her heart were breaking. He looked down silently at Lin Shui, the woman who was now kneeling at his feet in total desperation. This was the woman he had once loved with all his soul, now reduced to begging like a dog for the sake of another man. Surprisingly, he felt no emotion at all, not even a spark of pity. He asked her calmly why she was so certain he was responsible. Lin Shui looked up at him through a veil of tears, her voice trembling as she asked who else it could possibly be. She looked up at him, pleading, claiming she knew he hated them, hated her, Chun Hui, and even his own parents, but insisted that Chun Hui was innocent. She argued he was merely spoiled, and that his true nature wasn't bad. He couldn't help but smile. It was that same old, tired excuse again. He asked her why she didn't mention his good nature when he was busy setting traps to destroy entire families. Lin Shui was left utterly speechless. Of course, she knew exactly what Chun Hui had done. She was his accomplice, after all, having personally handled the accounts for his entertainment company. After a long silence, she shifted her tactics to an emotional appeal, admitting he had done wrong and would surely face the law. She asked if their past love meant nothing, reminding him of the time in their second year of college when she carried him to the hospital. She brought up the birthday watch she bought him with 6 months of scholarship savings, asking if he had truly forgotten those precious memories. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger. He remembered, of course, especially how she complained about his weight the entire way to the hospital. He also recalled how that very watch appeared on Chun Hui's wrist the very next day. He asked Lin Shui if she wasn't tired of acting after all these years. Lin Shui's face turned deathly pale in an instant. She clearly hadn't expected him to remember those small, stinging details so vividly. She had assumed he was just a fool blinded by love, and now she found herself unable to utter a single word in her defense. Every layer of her pretense was ruthlessly stripped away in that moment. He simply pointed toward the door and told her, quite coldly, to get out. Suddenly, Lin Shui became hysterical, scrambling up from the floor to grab his arm, screaming that he couldn't be this heartless to her. She desperately claimed he must still love her, and that revenge was his only way of showing it. She even begged him to start over with her. She promised to leave Chun Hui and help him take back everything from the Chun family, vowing to belong only to him from now on. Her words filled him with a wave of genuine nausea. He threw her hand off with such force that she collapsed back onto the floor. He looked down at her with nothing but pure contempt, asking if she truly believed she was in any position to negotiate terms with him. To him, she was worth less than a piece of trash on the street. At least trash could be recycled, while she only inspired disgust. His words were like a sharpened blade, finally shattering the last of her dignity. She sat there paralyzed, her eyes hollow and her spirit broken. Without a second glance, he turned and closed the door. Leaning against the wood, he felt his body slowly slide down as the weight of it all finally hit. He had just personally destroyed the last lingering memories of beauty in his life. The next day, exactly as Brother Lang predicted, the Chun Group was targeted. The tax bureau and disciplinary committee arrived, sealing the company and taking away every ledger and executive. Chen Zhanghe was criminally detained for multiple economic crimes. Lin Wan sold off all her jewelry and real estate, desperately begging for help, but she was met with closed doors at every turn. As the saying goes, when a wall starts to fall, everyone gives it a push. Those who once flattered the Chins now stayed far away, fearing they might be implicated. Yunqing's greatest commercial empire collapsed overnight, and we see that he became the sole survivor of this massive storm. It seems Chun Zhanghe had a premonition before the fall. He had isolated all assets under our protagonist's name, allowing him to inherit most of the remaining fortune. Though it didn't compare to the family's peak, it was still an astronomical sum. In an instant, he transformed from a poor boy eating plain buns into a wealthy man. He became the new elite of Yunqing. Many sought to flatter him, and many more wondered how he had managed to emerge from the storm completely unscathed. Ignoring the chaos of the outside world, the first thing he did was sell that magnificent villa. Then, he returned to the small alley where he was raised. He found the old man who sold steamed buns and bought the small shop right next to him, opening a modest little restaurant of his own. The restaurant was small, serving only a few simple, home-cooked dishes with him as the chef. On opening day, an unexpected guest arrived. It was Brother Lang, still wearing his tang suit. In the sunlight, the scar on his face seemed a little less menacing than usual. He sat alone, ordering braised pork and a bottle of beer. He ate slowly, and when he finished, he looked up and complimented the cooking. Brother Lang thanked him and asked about his future plans. He replied that he simply wanted to run this shop and live a quiet, stable life. Brother Lang laughed, asking if a man like him could truly be content staying in a kitchen forever. He simply asked why he wouldn't be. At least here, he noted, every bite of food he ate was clean. Brother Lang fell silent, then pulled an envelope from his pocket and pushed it forward. Inside was an international plane ticket and some cash. He warned that while the Chins were gone, Chun Zhanghe had many enemies, making it unsafe to stay. He suggested hiding abroad until the heat died down. Our protagonist didn't take the envelope, instead asking if Brother Lang felt at peace now that his revenge was complete. Brother Lang froze, the smile slowly fading from his face. He picked up his glass and drained the remaining beer in one gulp, admitting that he didn't. Looking out the window with a gaze full of incomprehensible weariness, he confessed it took 20 years to destroy his enemies, but he had lost everything else. "They are never coming back," he muttered. He stood up, pressed a few bills under his bowl, and turned to leave. Watching his retreating figure, our protagonist felt as if he were looking at his own future self, two men trapped by the past. After all, what is gained once revenge is taken? What is lost remains gone forever. Life at the restaurant continued, quiet and steady. He worked from sunrise to sunset, his days as still as stagnant water. He assumed his life would simply fade away like this. But then, a woman appeared and shattered that stillness. Her name was Su Qin, the owner of the flower shop across the street. She wasn't cold like Ling Shui. Hers was a warm, comfortable beauty. She often wore linen dresses and had eyes like crescent moons. Every day, she would come in, order the cheapest bowl of plain noodles, and sit quietly in the corner to eat. When she finished, she would leave just as quietly as she arrived. Occasionally, she would bring him a small bouquet of flowers. They were just simple wild daisies. She told him he looked lonely and hoped the flowers might brighten his mood a little. Not knowing how to respond, he simply accepted them, placing the flowers in the most prominent vase in the shop. Over time, they grew closer. He learned she was also alone in the city, and she eventually learned about his dark past. Yet, she didn't look at him with pity or curiosity. She simply told him, it's all in the past, and that was enough. Those 4 simple words felt warmer than any comfort he had ever known. Slowly, his frozen heart began to show signs of thawing. He began to look forward to her daily visits. He even started learning how to smile again, imagining a normal life. But just as he thought life was finally smiling back at him, an uninvited guest arrived to ruin everything. One afternoon, while Su Qin was eating and they were chatting, the restaurant door was suddenly kicked wide open. Several thuggish men walked in, led by a bald man with a hideous dragon tattoo snaking down his arm. "Which one of you is Chun Mo?" the bald man barked. Our protagonist stood up, instinctively shielding Su Qin behind him. The man looked him up and down with a yellow-toothed grin, announcing that someone had paid to take one of his legs. His heart sank. Trouble had found him at last. Whether it was Chun Jianghe's enemies or Chun Hui's remnants, he didn't know. The leader waved his hand, and the men behind him surrounded Chun Mo with steel pipes. Su Qin let out a terrified scream. He patted her shoulder to reassure her, then pulled a kitchen knife from the rack. "Think carefully," he warned them. "If you touch me, none of you are getting out of here easily." He held the knife with a cold, steady gaze. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't afraid of it. If they pushed him, he'd show them those 20 years weren't for nothing. The bald man wasn't intimidated. Instead, he laughed even harder. "Quite the tough guy. Get him, boys," he shouted. He promised to take the blame for whatever happened. A chaotic brawl was now inevitable, and the odds were not in our protagonist's favor. Though he knew how to fight, they had the numbers and the weapons. Soon, a pipe slammed into his arm, and the knife fell. The bald man approached with a sneer. "Next time, kid, keep your eyes open and don't offend the wrong people." He raised the pipe. He swung it down toward Chun Mo's leg with brutal force. Our protagonist closed his eyes, bracing for the impact. But the expected pain never came. When he opened his eyes, he saw a sight he would never forget as long as he lived. Su Qin, that gentle girl who usually spoke in a whisper, was standing in front of him. The cold steel pipe struck her back. She let out a muffled groan and collapsed. Blood trickled from her forehead, staining her white linen dress a deep, shocking red. "Su Qin," he roared, a sound like a wounded beast. "We see a man who has lost everything suddenly find a terrifying new strength." He leaped from the floor and lunged at the bald man, sinking his teeth into the man's neck with primal, desperate fury. He bit down as if to tear a piece of flesh away. The bald man screamed in agony, while his companions watched, utterly stunned. They had never seen such a suicidal way of fighting. Just then, the piercing sound of police sirens echoed from outside the restaurant. Someone had called for help. Sensing the shift in tide, the thugs dropped their weapons and fled into the afternoon light. Chun Mo didn't chase them. He rushed to Su Qin, scooped her up, and ran outside like a man possessed by madness. "Hold on, Su Qin. You have to be okay." Her warm blood covered his hands, a sight that burned into his mind. He ran through the streets, screaming for help. Passers-by stared as if he were insane, but he only cared about keeping her alive. Those next few hours were the longest wait of his life. He sat on the hallway bench, covered in blood, looking like a statue. He sat there without a soul, his mind a complete blank. He didn't dare imagine what he would do if something happened to Su Qin. Finally, the emergency room doors opened and the doctor stepped out, removing his mask to say the patient was out of danger. Hearing those words, his strained nerves finally snapped. Everything went black, and he lost consciousness right there in the hallway. When he finally woke up, he was in a hospital room. Su Qin was in the bed next to him, sleeping deeply with steady breaths. Looking at her pale face, he was consumed by guilt and lingering fear. He had dragged her into this. Without him, she would be safe. He stayed by her side for 3 days and nights until she finally woke. Seeing him, she gave a weak smile and said she felt fine. At that, his tears could no longer be held back. This 25-year-old man wept like a child, repeating, "I'm sorry," over and over. Calling him a fool, she reached out to wipe his tears, insisting it wasn't his fault. He held her cold hand against his cheek. He looked into her eyes and spoke every word with heavy intent, asking Su Qin to marry him once she recovered. She froze. Then she smiled, her eyes curving into crescents just like the first time they met. She said yes. It was a simple, beautiful moment. The first thing he did after her discharge was close the restaurant. He took Su Qin and left the city for a small coastal town. With his remaining money, he bought a small house with a yard. They filled it with her favorite flowers and even got a cat. They named the cat Mantu. He never asked about Yin City again. Chen Hui, Chun Jianghe, Lin Shui, and Brother Lang were all gone. Those people and those events felt like memories from a past life, buried deep away. His life became simple, focused only on Su Qin. They watched the sea, tended flowers, and played with the cat. But Su Qin's back bore a long scar that ached whenever it rained. Whenever she hurt, he would hold her and kiss the scar repeatedly, whispering apologies. She would tell him to stop saying those words. She would cover his mouth and tell him he owed no one an apology. He had simply suffered too much. And he had, indeed. He had suffered for 25 years, but now his life had a beam of light, a warm, true light that healed all his old wounds. He truly believed this was the end of his story, peaceful, stable, and happy, until the day he received a message from the past. The package from Yin City contained nothing but a newspaper and a single photograph. The newspaper featured a front-page headline from 6 months ago. It was the news of Chun Hui's execution. As for the photograph, it was a family portrait showing Chun Jianghe and Lin Wan holding a newborn. They were smiling happily, and the infant's features were identical to his own as a child. On the back of the photo, written in red ink, was a single chilling sentence. "Brother, the game has only just begun." To be honest, it was a message he never wanted to see.